So today I like to discuss the topic of laziness and how we relate to this on the Buddhist path, how we relate to this in our meditation, and what does Buddhism have to say about laziness, both what it is and also how to remedy it. So to start out with, one of the reasons I decided to talk about it is because typically what we think of as laziness in the modern world is actually brought into three different ways of being. So I think that's what's most interesting just starting out, just seeing if you want to continue to watch this or listen to this, is actually we're talking about three different kinds of behaviors, or I guess we could say sort of lifestyles or habits that we might get into. And to me, I find that interesting, especially the second one, which is, being a little mysterious right now. We'll get into it in a minute. But the second one, which is typically not thought of as laziness. So this is one of the reasons I chose this. And as always, I want this to be useful for our practice. So for me personally, I'm a pretty lazy person, just self-admittedly. And obviously, if we're sort of critiquing our habit patterns and ways of being around this, we have to be gentle. We have to be compassionate, right? The teaching is not there to criticize me. It's not there to criticize you. It's there to point out something so we can actually become more skillful in our practice, so that we can start to grow, so that we can transform and move closer to peace and freedom. So just saying that right off the bat, right? Because whenever we study something where we're looking at our behaviors, we're critiquing something, it can easily go into the too much self-critique, which actually is the third type of laziness. So we're going to get there. So anyways, just to start off on the context, right, to bring it into the Dharma, let's use the Tibetan word for laziness, which is the word lelo. Right. And this is based on the Sanskrit, which I can't pronounce. That's one of the reasons I'm not pronouncing it. But the Sanskrit looks to be something like kausidya. But again, I do not know how to pronounce Sanskrit. So you can go search that up. But either way, we can use the Tibetan word lelo. And this refers specifically to a kind of like spiritual laziness or spiritual sloth is another way to put it. And this is a lethargic relationship to virtue and practice, right? So that's kind of an interesting way to put it right away. So it's not just general laziness in our life, but of course you can apply any of these teachings to your life as a whole. But it's really referring to a lethargic relationship to the practice of virtue, which is generally how we define Dharma, like that which removes suffering and brings more wakefulness, right? So that in itself, I think, is quite an interesting point, because often we might judge ourselves or another for being lazy in any of these three types of way we're about to get into. But we may judge it on sort of something that, how do you say it, doesn't matter in this context, right? Meaning, like, I don't know. I'll give you kind of the flip side of the example. Some people might think meditators are really lazy because they just sit there all day, when actually they're the most unlazy people, that could exist from the perspective of this teaching, right? Really what we're talking about here is the paramita of joyful effort, or virya, right? So that's kind of interesting, just as a thought experiment, to start thinking in this way. We have to kind of flip a little bit what we think is lazy and what we think is being diligent or effortful, or having that joyful effort. But anyways, with that said, just with some context, that we're really talking about a spiritual kind of laziness, a lack of interest in virtue and practice that will liberate ourselves and others, that will serve a longer lasting happiness and peace, right? So then we have these three types that it breaks out into, and I'll just list them, I'll just name them, and then we can go into them more specifically. So the first type is what we normally would consider to be lazy in the modern Western world, which is procrastination, lethargy, right? Just being lazy, right? I'll meditate tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. I'm too tired right now. I'd prefer to just, sit and watch Netflix and eat chips, right? So that's the first type of laziness. We're all familiar with this, so I don't think we need to go into, a lot of detail on that. By the way, I will be talking about the antidotes to each of these too. So the second one is the surprise one for most people. This is the laziness of busyness, right? Which is a modern epidemic. We are often taught our worth is caught up in our busyness, right? Our I don't know, like everything, who we are, how successful we're going to be. All of it is defined by how busy we are, how much we're doing, right? Again, we'll come back to this. I'm just sort of introducing them. And then type 3 is actually an interesting one too, because this kind of type 2 and type 3 are sort of like the ends of a spectrum, right? And type 3 is discouragement. It's actually like self-deprecation, too much self-critique, too much, self-worth issues, all of that. I can't do it because I'm not worthy enough. So that's also considered laziness here. Why? We have to go back to the initial premise, because it blocks our effort of the practice of virtue, or any practices that will lead us to more peace and freedom. So that's kind of just a brief introduction, but let's unpack these a little bit more. So the type 1, first type of laziness, procrastination. As I said, we don't have to talk too much about this. I think we all know this, right? Attachment to sleep, comfort, attachment to pleasure is what they talk about in traditional Buddhism. But the antidote, as I said I would talk about, is important. And this is mainly contemplating impermanence. So when we contemplate impermanence, we realize that things are changing all the time, that actually we can never repeat a moment. Once that moment happened, it's gone. And then, of course, our life is finite, right? There is a timer ticking, and we don't know when that timer will stop. None of us know, right? I mean, a lot of us think, I'm going to age well and have a family and grandkids and blah, 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 and retire. A lot of people save for retirement and actually don't get to enjoy that because they expire before retirement. And that's just a reality. For many people, I think this is like a dark truth, but in Buddhism, it's just a truth. It's not like dark or light. It's just a truth. And in the context of laziness, if we're not remembering this, it's easy to sit around. It's easy to say, I'll do it tomorrow, or, I'll practice that later, or I'll work with that challenging emotion later. So when we meditate on impermanence and death, it actually creates a soberness, a sobriety. It's not to be dark or morbid. It's to create a sobriety where I don't actually know if I'm going to have that chance later. So why don't I do that now? Like, what's worthwhile? Am I going to, is eating chips on the couch going to help me? No. I'm going to, just a little sidebar here. We also need to take a break, right? We can see with this sort of type 2 busyness, it's okay to take a break. Right? It's okay to consciously say, I need a break. I need to eat chips on the couch, and then I'm going to go back to my practice of virtue. That's actually that's part of joyful effort, right? That's part of virya. So anyways, this is kind of the main antidote. I'm going to add in an antidote just from my own journey, which may or may not be true for you, which is like an obsession with encountering truth. And in Buddhism, we don't feel truth is something you get to or that you build up with nice ideas. It's something you have to uncover in meditation. It's something where we're continually pursuing, how do things exist? How are they? How are they functioning? Are they permanent or impermanent? Are they solid and unchanging? Are they interdependent or independent? We're constantly exploring this. That pursuit for me brings energy. That brings joyful effort. I love that pursuit. Sometimes I have to take a break from it, or I get, overwhelmed with life or emotions or whatever, but that pursuit inspires me. So besides impermanence and death, I encourage you to find some kind of piece of dharma, wisdom, knowledge, meditation that gives you that joy, that brings you to the cushion, right? That brings you to your practice, right? So now type 2, busyness. So yes, and this is a certain type of busyness. Usually it's referred to as worldly activity, where we are spending too much of our time and energy and worry and fear engaged in very temporary things, right? Of course, this can be taken to an extreme where some people then will say, I'm going to quit the whole thing. Actually, the Buddha didn't advise that for lay people. If people want to become monks and nuns or yogis and yoginis, fine, and they choose that and they sort of live that lifestyle. But for his non-monastic followers, the Buddha actually taught a lot on how to, be ethical in business, how much money, that is enough. Like, when is enough? How to think of supporting others, all of that kind of stuff. So we have to separate out here. When does it turn into the laziness of busyness? When are we just pursuing kind of ego trips? When are we pursuing, I don't know, really for me, this comes down to avoidance, right? So I can find myself just endlessly finding tasks to do because I want to avoid being bored, or I want to avoid, I don't know, exercising or having a difficult conversation or meditating, right? So that's what this is referring to, that busyness that's avoiding, right? So we can see this, that a lot of workaholic tendencies revolve around that, or just accomplishment. And again, nothing wrong with accomplishing things. It's just sort of, when does that become excessive? And mainly, it's causing us to avoid virtue or the practice of dharma, is essentially what this is saying, right? I will kind of point this out. This can also happen to dharma practitioners, meaning, it's real, the easiest way to hide is behind virtue. And what I mean by that is, it looks like we're being a dharmic person, a really good meditator, whatever, right? But in actuality, we're running away from our mind. That happens. That's happened to me. I can't really judge anyone else. I can't see their internal experience, but it happens to others, I'm pretty sure. And so that's also possible. So we can very much look like, a spiritual person, but we're actually just in busyness all the time. So maybe some of you are wondering, well, what do I do then? The point here is we need to have the joyful effort to look at the nature of mind, to look at the nature of experience, and to sort of see where we're bound, and to untangle and want to wake up from that for the benefit of others as well. So that's just like a summary, how to put it. But of course, that implies a lot. And I think that's how we get around that type of busyness, right? The worldly busyness, that's a little bit easier to see on surface level. Spiritual busyness, not easy to see sometimes, right? Maybe like the term virtue signal can come up sometimes with that. I don't mean that in a social political sense, more just sort of like we're looking like a virtuous person, but in actuality, we're not really working on our mind. We're not really trying to, I don't know how to say it, be with our suffering and learn to develop compassion, which is really the essence of the Buddhist path. So that leads us to the third type, which unfortunately is also very common in the modern world. I've really struggled with this one, which is, discouragement. A sense of like, I can't do this. Other people are good at this. I'm not good at meditation. I'm too much of an angry person, too much attachment, too many thoughts, too distracted, any of that, right? And sometimes it feels like honesty or humility, and I think it's important to be honest. But there's a tone there where it can turn into avoidance, right? Where we're actually just using it as an excuse instead of working step by step. Nobody says we have to be good at meditation or dharma practice or, working with our minds. It's intense work when we're actually doing it, right? Because we're looking at, all the problems internally. And so that can be intense. So we need to pace ourselves. We need to go step by step. And so this isn't saying to sort of go from 0 to 100, it's saying go to 1 or 2, 3, right? And if we feel down about ourselves, if we don't feel worthy, if we feel, if we're always comparing ourselves with others, this can turn into this third type of laziness. I just realized I didn't talk about an antidote for type 2. I kind of did a little bit, but here's some of the traditional antidotes, are like contemplating the nature of samsara, meaning like samsara is endless, and so worldly activity is endless. And just recognizing that busyness doesn't actually deliver what we're after. Like, again, looking back at what do we actually want to accomplish and what's going to be most worthwhile in our life. Sorry, I forgot about that. So coming back to type 3, Often for me, this type 3, the discouragement or self-deprecation or low self-worth, one of the best antidotes is studying Buddha nature. And there's not really like a way to meditate on it. There's analogies we can meditate on, but we often encounter Buddha nature through meditating on non-dual wisdom or emptiness in Buddhism. We can encounter it through meditating on bodhicitta. But either way, the perspective here is that fundamentally, the nature of our minds is neither good nor bad. And actually, underneath, it's totally, it's free in a way that we're not normally experiencing. And then that has compassion is embedded in that freedom, right? And so when we meditate on that, or even just when we study and reflect on it, we start to see that there is a fundamental openness, right, that we can contact. And that fundamental openness is just part of our nature. It's not like we have to achieve that. It's not like, some kind of medal or title we receive from someone else. It's completely related to our own experience and fundamentally what the nature of mind is. And so, of course, we encounter that in meditation. But even I think the idea of it is really important. Some teachers called it basic goodness, but when they're referring to goodness here, they're referring to like a goodness beyond good or bad, right? That's why the word basic is there. So it can be a little bit of a deep dive in the beginning, but I encourage you, to learn more about what Buddha nature means. There's lots of teachings and texts on it. I talk about it quite a lot here, but you can just search and find some things on that. So that would be the main antidote I would recommend. But there's also sort of just a sense of like one's capacity that we can do it, and sometimes capacity in a very practical way, like awakening our capacity or being open to it, just happens through small steps. I think that's the most practical thing. When the people I work with, mentees on a regular basis, sort of get off track or sort of fall off the regular meditation, the thing I recommend is just very simple. It's just like practice a short amount of time, but just do it every day. And that's part of what this is to keep the energy and I don't know how you put it, just sort of a sense of healthy worth, a sense up, right? So that, we don't tank and we don't lose that connection and we start to sort of critique ourselves or feel we can't do it or whatever. So sometimes it's important to just take small steps towards our capacity and increasing it, right? So I think that's about it. But you can see, basically these three types pervade a lot of our experience. So just like any Dharma, it's not telling you shouldn't have these. It's saying, look at these. Look at, where they might be present in your life. And generally, the antidote is virya, one of the paramitas or joyful effort. It's cultivating a joyful effort that is the antithesis of these, right? And so instead of self-deprecating, little by little, just growing our confidence. That was the word I was looking for. Little by little, growing our confidence, reflecting on Buddha nature, studying it, right? When it comes to sort of busyness, taking some stock, there's some obvious busyness we need to do to, make a living and support a family if we have one. But when is enough? And then the first one, recognizing the difference between needing a rest and when it falls into procrastination, right? And just being a little bit diligent there. So as always, there's so much to say on these topics. This is just more meant to be a short Dharma talk on it. But I hope you got something out of this. Please let me know, how you relate to this kind of teaching and approach and sort of, Dharma on laziness. I appreciate you a lot. Thanks so much for listening or watching to the end. And feel free, as always, to comment or reach out at scotttusa.com. Thanks so much.